You must be the stupidest SOB on earth. Colleen, the beautiful 20-year-old red-haired woman, yelled at me. Then she walked over to the two absolutely gigantic labor goons who were about to beat me senseless, or worse. She jabbed her index finger into the chest of the 6'6" guy his buddy called Tiny Tim. She was a lioness, a spitfire, or just one tough-as-nails girl. "Leave him alone," she said as she pointed to me. "There are so many witnesses, you'll both go to prison if you hurt him." She leaned her shoulders back and her very firm breasts stretched out her tight white silk blouse, distracting my other potential butcher who could have been a stunt double for Godzilla. The clerical staff was leaving the Teamsters Union Hall at the end of the workday, and they were all looking at us. The redhead took my hand and firmly pulled me away from the building. "Don't get into your car. They'll write down your license plate, follow you, and it won't end well. I'll drop you off somewhere safe, and you can pick up your car later." I was a 20-year-old private eye investigating a murder and arson at the Teamsters building for an insurance company. I was a sophomore in college, and this seemed like the most exciting summer job on earth. Without the help and protection of Colleen, it might have been my last job. The job was posted on the Temple University job placement bulletin board. I was a journalism literature major, and I thought this job would help me write crime and spy novels. Only now did I understand why I was assigned to take this investigation. None of the experienced detectives in the office were stupid enough to take a case this dangerous. Colleen nervously checked her rearview mirror. "They're following us. I won't stop. I'll just slow down. Then I'll drop you off at City Hall. Run out of the car and take the first subway to anywhere before they can get to you. Before you go, give me the film. Tomorrow, I'll trade it to the two enforcers for your life." "Thank you." I realized that she was right and pulled the film from my 35mm Nikon FDN. I'm Steve. I may have been facing death and scared half to death, but I couldn't pass up a chance to date a girl this wild, this pretty, and ultimately this Irish. She had a chest I could die for, and I almost did. Why did you save me, and would you like to go out with me this Saturday night? Maybe because my middle name is Veronica. She's the patron saint of photographers and painters, but mostly because in addition to being incredibly naive and defenseless, you're cute. Saturday will be great. I wrote down Colleen's number on my wrist as she ran a red light to lose our tail, and then I jumped out of the slowly moving car at Broad and Market Street in Center City, Philadelphia, as I ran like hell for the subway entrance. I lost the guy who looked like an NFL linebacker who chased after me as I ducked into the first subway, about to depart even though it was headed in the wrong direction from my home. Which, come to think of it, was a good idea. Sitting on the loud, rocking subway car, I thought back 15 minutes and finally realized that Colleen was right. I was an idiot, not the genius I thought I was. It was a liberating revelation. It also explained why my school grades were always so mediocre. While investigating the murder and arson that occurred 2 days before, I discovered and photographed the two labor goons setting fire to the back of the building. I can't believe how stupid I was to lecture them and tell them to stop. They chased me to the front where Colleen interceded. This wasn't like the detectives on TV, the PIs on 77 Sunset Strip, or Surfside 6, who never got into dangerous trouble like this. I decided that in real life, being a PI was too perilous for a 5'8", 120-pound weakling like me. The only things I had ever punched were keys on a typewriter. I was clearly not cut out to be another Sam Spade-style hard-boiled detective. I was too, I guess you could say, soft-boiled. It broke my heart, but the next day I quit my job, which came as no surprise to my boss as I explained my adventure with the Teamsters. He liked me and made a phone call securing me a job at a small local bookstore his sister owned called Betty's Bookmark. The greatest injury I suffered there was a very painful paper cut as I leafed through the novel The Maltese Falcon, while on a break. 2 years ago, another beautiful Irish Catholic girl named Marie broke my heart so badly that I hadn't dated anyone since she moved away. This was my first date since that afternoon, and here I was dating another Irish Catholic girl. I just never learn. Saturday night as I approached Colleen's house, I was scared because she was Catholic and I was Jewish. Why do I only fall for Irish Catholic girls? It only leads to heartache and grief from their families. As a child, I grew up in a row house, or townhouse as it's called in some places, 3 doors down from Marie, the most beautiful girl in the Logan neighborhood. Her family was German-Irish Catholic, and she was a blonde-haired goddess. I remember when we were in 4th grade, watching her leave her house all dressed in white for her first communion. I'd never before seen her all dressed up like this. We were so young that I didn't even know what that meant. I only knew she looked like an angel with a halo-like garland resting on her hair. I smiled at her, and she waved and smiled back at me with a radiance that I would never forget. That was the moment that I fell in love with her, even though our parents forbade us from speaking with one another. We were both forbidden by our parents from speaking to one another because she was a Catholic of German-Irish descent, and I was Jewish of Russian descent. I attended Logan Public School. Marie attended Holy Child Catholic Elementary School. We had no mutual friends and only saw one another from our porches. We just always silently locked eyes as we sat on our porches, afraid of drawing our parents' fury and punishment if our parents overheard us speaking to one another. For fun, if no one was watching, we'd silently act like mimes, making silly faces at each other and laughing. One sunny day, after I stuck out my tongue at her with my thumbs in my ears, waving my fingers at her, she responded by blowing me a kiss, which I pretended to catch and return the same way. We kept throwing and catching long-distance kisses to one another until one of her brothers came outside. It felt like we'd really been kissing. I didn't understand why I was so excited and aroused. One rainy day when we were both 13, we shared my umbrella as we walked home together in the rain after running into each other at the Logan Branch Library. We were singing songs from the Broadway play West Side Story. It seemed so appropriate because it was a play about a boy and girl who loved each other, but because the Tony was white and Maria was Puerto Rican, their love was forbidden, just like Romeo and Juliet, just like Marie and me. My right hand held the umbrella. Marie placed her left arm around my waist and her right hand on mine on the umbrella and squeezed it as she snuggled close to me to stay dry. Her hair was the sweetest fragrance I'd ever inhaled. For an instant, I thought I was struck by lightning. It was so electrifying. When we got to the line in the song, Maria, I just kissed a girl named Maria, I summoned up all the courage in my soul as I leaned over and kissed Marie on her cheek. She removed her right hand from the umbrella and with it pulled my face to hers as she kissed me on my lips. I was in heaven. I'm sure that was the moment when I reached puberty, as a gallon of testosterone surged through my body. The gold cross on the long gold chain around her neck entangled itself on the long silver chain, holding the silver Jewish mezuzah around my neck. It was the most wonderful moment of my life until her outraged mother saw us and slapped Marie across her face, dragging her away, which tore off the two chains that held the religious ornaments around our necks, dropping them next to each other into a rain puddle, which like a prism reflected all the colors of the rainbow. Her mother screamed, forbidding her from ever again speaking to me because I killed Christ. I screamed back at Marie's mother, "When I grow up, I'm going to marry Marie, and you can't stop us." Her mother turned and laughed out loud that she would absolutely guarantee that Marie couldn't marry me. I picked up my mezuzah and Marie's cross, placing them in my pocket. A few minutes later, as I recounted this event to my parents between my sobs, my mother then slapped me across my face, forbidding me from ever again speaking to Marie because she was German-Irish Catholic and German people like Marie had murdered Jewish children like me in German concentration camps. I know that sounds insane, but in the 1950s that's how it was where I grew up. Marie didn't kill any Jewish children. I screamed at my mother. She wasn't even alive during World War II. I don't care what you think. Someday I'm going to marry her, and you can't stop me. It was now my father's turn to slap me in the face. At that moment, I resolved that despite my parents, I would never date Jewish girls. It wasn't hard to do. When I actually did ask out a few Jewish girls in high school, they all turned me down. One girl explained that I was very funny, but so was every other Jewish boy she knew. She believed that Jewish boys were all natural-born comedians. When I was 15, I dated one Irish girl, Kathleen, who also knew Marie. I tried to impress her by making her laugh, and sometimes she did, but another time she was offended and stopped going out with me. I guess the comedic instinct was not so prevalent among boys in the Christian community. Unlike me, those unfunny Christian boys would just have to settle for being tall, blonde-haired, muscular, and handsome. If I sound jealous, it's because I was. A month later, I traveled to Gretchen's house for our first date. Gretchen's family was German, which in the bigoted eyes of my mother meant they were Jew-hating Nazis. When her mother opened her front door for me, I was shocked, devastated, and couldn't believe what I saw. Above their fireplace mantel was a large 50 by 30-inch photo of Gretchen's father, He wore a German army officer's uniform complete with a red swastika band on his arm. A scream involuntarily let my lips as I turned and ran out of Gretchen's house. I was shocked that even my crazy bigoted mother could be right once in a while. I dreamt and hoped that someday when we graduated high school and were no longer dependent on our parents that Marie and I could at least be friends and hopefully much more. After that incident when Marie sat on her porch, my parents wouldn't allow me to sit on my porch. On the first night that the movie West Side Story played at the Logan Movie Theater 2 blocks from our homes, we were both 16 years old. We ran into each other at the candy counter. I was alone. She said she wasn't on a date. She was getting popcorn for her 3 brothers. Not only couldn't she date Jewish or Protestant boys, she told me, she was forbidden from even speaking to Catholic boys who went not to parochial, but to public school. We hungered for each other. We ran up to the deserted balcony, where we hugged and kissed for a few minutes of heavenly pleasure in the dark. As I whispered in her ear, I didn't ask but told her that someday we'll get married. She nodded her head yes as she continued kissing me. Then Maria whispered in my ear, "No matter how long it takes, amor vincit omnia," as she ran back downstairs before her brothers could find us and beat the crap out of me. Marie was now the object of all my dreams and fantasies, hopes and aspirations. The first thing I did when I returned to school the next day was ask the Latin teacher what amor vincit omnia meant. He explained that it was from Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. It was written on a nun's brooch, and it meant, surprisingly for a nun, love conquers all. I became my mantra as I repeated it over and over that day, and for many years to come. I never saw her go out on dates, and after kissing Marie, I had no interest in dating or kissing another girl. I was saving myself for Marie. In another year, we both graduate from high school, and then our families couldn't keep us apart. I literally counted down the days until that event and our freedom. On a hot, humid afternoon in June, I was leaving my house with my parents to attend my high school graduation. I planned on contacting Marie the next day. It was a week after Marie graduated from Little Flower Catholic High School. Marie walked out of her front door, and despite the heat, she seemed dressed for a blizzard. Wearing the thick, old-fashioned black habit of a novice Catholic nun with a large white collar and head covering as sweat poured down her face from the unforgiving heat. Her mother beamed with pride as she photographed her daughter and then smirked at me. "Don't go," I screamed at Marie. As Marie looked at me, tears filled her eyes. She tried to pull away from her parents as they dragged her off to a convent, I think against her will. My parents dragged me back inside our house. It was the end of my dream and the worst moment of my life. I cried into a pillow for the next hour and didn't attend my graduation. I was so broken-hearted that I wanted to die like Romeo, but I had no poison. I never forgot the look of sorrow and regret on Marie's face that morning. Now, years later, I recalled all this pain and fear as I walked up the steps to Colleen's house. I had to run a gauntlet of 10 uncles and aunts who interrogated me on the porch. The men were all steel workers and 5 times my size. I tried to keep things light and funny until they asked to what parish I belonged. When I explained that I was Jewish, the porch became silent. At that moment, I realized that I had just entered the Irish Inquisition. Colleen's youngest uncle put both of his hands on my shoulders and squeezed me hard. He was the smallest uncle at about 250 pounds. "So, are you one of those Jewish boys who think that Irish Catholic girls are all pushovers?" I wanted to say, "I hope so," but he wouldn't realize I was kidding. I looked him straight in the eye. From my experience, all Catholic boys think that all Jewish girls are pushovers, and all Jewish boys think all Catholic girls are also. But that's because the Catholic girls aren't sleeping with the Catholic boys or anyone else, and the Jewish girls aren't sleeping with the Jewish boys or anyone else. So all Jewish and Catholic boys daydream and make up lies to impress one another. He cracked up, let go of my shoulders, and laughed. This kid is right. I spent the next few minutes rubbing my shoulders to try and get some blood back into them. After I passed this, the toughest oral examination of my life, I picked up Colleen. She told me that I was safe. Her uncles wouldn't kill me, nor would the 2 Teamsters. She handed the 2 Teamster guys the film, and since I now had no proof of any wrongdoing, they had no further interest in me, so long as I kept my mouth shut and stayed away from them. Done and done. I answered. I wanted to see the latest James Bond movie, but Colleen said that I'd already seen too many, and continuing to be a spy or a PI would only get me killed. She was right. When I suggested a John le Carre spy movie, she playfully punched my shoulder, which was still sore from her uncle's hold on it. We instead saw some banal Doris Day rom-com or romantic comedy that recycled a plot from 10 other Doris Day rom-coms. I was shocked that by the end of the film, 45-year-old Doris was still a virgin, despite all her movies fighting off the sexual advances of Rock Hudson, Cary Grant, and James Garner. Is that what critics call willing suspension of disbelief? You could summarize every Doris Day movie of that era in one sentence: "Oh no, I won't have sex with you because I'm a good girl." I love Doris' voice and singing, but her "I'm still a virgin" movies just made me groan. Oscar Levant once quipped that he knew Doris Day before she was a virgin. After the movie and over coffee, we discovered that Colleen didn't know the 5 Jewish girls in her neighborhood that I knew, and I didn't know the 4 Catholic boys and girls that she knew on my street. That made us both sad and guilty. We decided to have a party, explain why, and host them all. It would be an ecumenical get-together in keeping with the Second Vatican Council that had recently concluded. None of the 10 Jewish or Catholic kids were allowed by their parents to attend a party with kids of a different religion. It was sad and pathetic. The two of us were in uncharted territory. Colleen and I were very frank with each other. We accepted that if I was Catholic, I wouldn't be in college. I would be in Vietnam like all the boys who graduated Cardinal Doherty Catholic High School. If she was Jewish, she wouldn't be a secretary. She'd also be in college studying elementary education like all the Jewish girls with whom I'd graduated only high school. Though Colleen wanted to be the first in her family to attend college, it wasn't in the cards. That made her cry, which touched my heart and soul. After we're married and I have a job, I'm putting you through college. I don't know where that came from, but I meant every word of it. Colleen kissed me with passion and tenderness. That was the last moment when either of us thought of ever dating anyone else. Our parents were not pleased by our dating, but they didn't have a choice. After we sat all 4 parents down and asked if they wanted a relationship with their future grandchildren, then they started a fight over the religion of our future children. Colleen was quick on her feet. "If you 4 don't stop this right now, we'll raise them as Protestants just to piss all 4 of you off, and that's a promise." "Then what about your daughter Moira?" her mother asked. "Will she remain Catholic, or will you change her religion too?" Her mother swallowed a long drink of water and roughly slammed the glass on the table. I was confused. That's when Colleen dropped what could have been a relationship-ending bombshell on me. She was a single mother of a 2-year-old daughter. She and a guy named Roger had been an item since junior high school. In high school, he was arrested for possession of marijuana. He chose going into the army over going to jail. 2 months later, Colleen discovered she was pregnant. He was already in Vietnam and made no provision for child support. Colleen and her parents looked at me. Her parents and mine hoped I would leave. Colleen hoped I would stay. I put my arm on Colleen's shoulder. "I can't wait to meet your daughter. Why don't the 3 of us go out for dinner and ice cream tonight?" She hugged me and then screamed at her parents that she should have been allowed to tell me about Moira in her own good time. When Colleen and I were alone, I commented that she had the temper for which redheads were famous. With a large smile on her face, she grabbed me by my neck and gently squeezed. "Let's get this straight. I'm not some fiery-tempered redhead. I'm a calm, easygoing strawberry blonde, and I'll beat the stuffing out of anyone who says otherwise." She laughed a beautiful, infectious laugh. I responded with the magic words my father taught me that would always end an argument with a woman. "Yes, dear, you're right. I've read dozens of books on dating and understanding women, but it always comes down to what my father taught me, given often and given early, since you won't win any argument with a woman anyway. Just because that sounds sexist doesn't mean it isn't true." Moira was a doll. Speaking of dolls, before picking her up, I drove to a toy store and bought her a doll to start our relationship on a good note. We had a great dinner. Moira liked to sing, and we all joined in with her for verses of The Farmer in the Dell. I don't have much of a voice, but no one complained. A year later, after I graduated college and landed a job as a writer for a local daily newspaper, Colleen and I married. Moira was of course the flower girl, or considering that this was the 60s, maybe she was the flower child. I was good to my word and paid for Colleen's college tuition. Her parents sat for Moira while Colleen was in class. Of course, they fed Moira a never-ending supply of Catholic-oriented comic books, coloring books, and sing-along books. I had no intention of trying to convert Moira to Judaism, But that didn't stop me from teaching her the words to "I have a little dreidel," just to annoy my in-laws. We had come to respect and like each other, and the next time I came over to pick up Moira, my in-laws joined Moira in singing, "I have a little dreidel." I returned the gesture and joined them in my off-key version of Silent Night. My mother-in-law hugged me, as my father-in-law brought us 2 beers. They were grateful that I took good care of their daughter and granddaughter. I was grateful that they gave birth to and raised such a wonderful woman. One day her father took me aside and warned me that Colleen had a wild side and could be willful, so I had to keep my eyes open if I wanted my marriage to last. He shocked me when he said that he would understand and not get angry with me if occasionally I had to slap his daughter to keep her in line. I'd never hit a boy, much less a girl. My weapon of choice was talking my way out of a bad situation. It had always worked well for me, except of course that day at the Teamsters building. As I recalled how she pushed around the 2 labor goons, I realized that if she wanted to, she could probably mop the floor with me. 2 years later, Roger, Colleen's ex-boyfriend and Moira's bio dad, completed his hitch in the army. He returned to Philadelphia and demanded visitation rights to his daughter. I quickly agreed that he could see her after arrangements were made for past, present, and future child support from him. Colleen instantly took Roger's side and said that Moira was not my daughter. This was not my decision and none of my business. I was dumbfounded. I treated Moira like my daughter. I supported her financially and emotionally. I was the one who stayed up with her all night when she was sick. More importantly, I was the man she called Daddy. Now her mother told me I wasn't her father and to step aside for the criminal who was. It was as if Roger's return flipped a switch in Colleen's heart. "Roger, you better never again set foot in my house," I stated. Colleen said that was fine. She would take Moira to see her real father whenever he wanted. Roger laughed at me. He boasted me that he could easily steal my wife from me whenever he wanted. I was hurt that Colleen didn't contradict him, and I was afraid that he was right. He called me a lot of names, including but not limited to Yellow Belly Draft Dodger, and threatened to have me beaten up in my own home by his army friends, while he was far away with an alibi. I told him to go for it. I wasn't scared of him. I would be ready for him. He escalated the threats and told me that he had 11 confirmed kills in Vietnam and asked if I wanted to help him make it an even dozen. He pushed open his jacket to show me a revolver in his belt, but said he'd rather beat me to death with his hands. Now I really was scared but tried to hide it. It was the first time I had actually seen a gun up close. Upon hearing of this, my dad secretly gave me his World War II Colt 45 and took me to a gun range where he taught me how to use it. I practiced with hundreds of rounds until I could hit a 3-inch target at 20 feet 3 times in 3 seconds. Colleen knew nothing about this. I was afraid that if she did know, she would warn Roger. I knew it would be better for me if he wasn't on his guard. It would give me a tactical edge. Even though I did not have a carry permit, I kept the gun on me at all times. I'd rather face a courtroom than a coroner. 2 weeks later, while Moira was in her room asleep, Colleen and I were in our living room giggling as we watched the TV show Laugh In, when 3 masked guys broke down our front door, 2 with baseball bats in hand, the third with a handgun. After I released the safety and chambered a hollow point round in my dad's Colt, I put 2 of them in a hospital and the one with the gun in the morgue. Colleen's ex-boyfriend was one of the guys I sent to the hospital. I was shaking so hard I almost passed out and had to sit down. Colleen ignored me but comforted him while he was bleeding on our living room floor from my round to his stomach. She seemed overly concerned about a man who had just tried to bash in my head with a baseball bat. Colleen was furious with me because I didn't fire a warning round, and she called me a murderer. She believed that I should have endured a beating instead of killing my attacker. In truth, there is no time for warning shots when you're faced with an armed assailant, much less 3. I was in fear for my life and Colleen's. They were only a few feet from us when I finally fired. Roger's father was a powerful, politically connected police captain and tried to pin a murder rap on me in revenge for shooting his son. He had me dragged down to police headquarters in handcuffs, where I accidentally kept falling down flights of stairs because I refused to deny I fired in self-defense and confessed to premeditated murder. Their typed confession did not contain my signature, only my blood. I had been a reporter long enough to understand that most suspected criminals in Philadelphia had confessions beaten out of them as standard operating procedure. The publisher of my newspaper phoned the mayor of Philadelphia, who forced the police to release me from the jail ward in the local hospital where I was treated for a broken arm and collarbone. After the newspaper published a front-page article about the incident that praised me as a hero, the DA refused to file a murder charge against me, calling the event a clear case of self-defense. Colleen surprised me and tore out my heart when she took her daughter with her to visit Roger in the hospital, where he was handcuffed to his bed. Things were never the same between us after that. It was clear that she was totally under his influence. I tried being super husband, with flowers, intimate dinners, etc., but nothing worked. I don't know what Colleen said to Moira, but she was cold to me and stopped calling me daddy. That broke my heart. Because of his father's power and influence, Roger got off lightly and was sentenced to only 6 months in jail and 6 months of community service. Colleen secretly visited him 3 times, but I found out when Moira told me about the guards and bars she saw. Roger went to family court, and a judge, friendly with his father, granted him visitation rights. He was also ordered to pay only $20 a month in child support, which was a joke. Forget food and clothing. I paid $100 a month just for her medical insurance. Colleen claimed that though she would never cheat on me, she still had strong feelings for Roger. I asked her if she wanted a divorce, but she declined. She said that I had to understand that she loved both of us. Was it because she really loved me, or because I made a good living and Roger had few prospects? His felony conviction ended his dream to be a police officer, or much of anything else that was legitimate. When I naively asked why she was still so devoted to him, she blew my mind with her admission. It wasn't Roger's marijuana that landed him in the army when they were in high school. It was Colleen's. She was dealing drugs in her prim and proper Catholic high school. Roger took the rap by himself, leaving Colleen in the clear. She was grateful, and she may have felt that she owed him one because he had been such a stand-up guy for her. I felt bad for him. I softened my attitude towards his occasional Saturday visits with his daughter. Right after Roger was released from jail, Colleen had a lot of homework and had to stay late at the college library several evenings a week doing research. When she returned, she sometimes spoke at a mile a minute. She claimed to have imbibed in too much coffee in the library. I wondered if she was on some kind of drug stronger than caffeine that also started with the letter C and was grown in Colombia. The next time Colleen and I saw her parents, her father warned Colleen to stay clear of that moron Roger and the bad habits he introduced her to in high school, or she would lose a good man, along with her child and her parents. Her dad looked straight at me as he warned her that if he was her husband, he would slap her face the next time she spoke to Roger. He took me aside and explained that though Colleen was in fact dealing drugs in high school, Roger had introduced her to drugs, initiated her into the business, and was her supplier. Her folks hadn't known it at the time. It seemed that Roger wasn't such a stand-up guy after all. I was confused as hell. I loved Colleen, but I no longer trusted her. I loved Moira, but she alienated herself from me. She wanted nothing to do with me. I knew deep down that this marriage was over, but I wasn't ready to pull the pin. I hoped against hope that I could fix it and we could live happily ever after, but I didn't have a clue as to how. Since I was an investigative reporter, I went into automatic mode and began investigating. I have a confession to make. Ever since my girlfriend Bonnie stole the lunch money from my desk in 2nd grade, I've had a hard time trusting people, especially females. No, actually it's not hard, it's impossible. I was now a feature writer for my newspaper and could write about whatever tickled my fancy. So, relying on the adage that one hand washes the other, I decided to write a column on private detectives who track cheating spouses. I interviewed several PIs I knew from my private eye days who now freelanced but were once my coworkers at the firm that employed me as a private eye. The research produced 3 highly regarded columns and 2 close friends. My articles brought them a fortune in new business. Of course, it was a complete breach of journalistic ethics to ask one of them to do me a favor and spy on my wife for a week. But that didn't stop me. He sadly revealed to me that Colleen wasn't at the library. She was at Roger's apartment 2 nights that week. I didn't have film or audio, but I didn't need it to know what was happening. I wished that instead of shooting him in his stomach, I had aimed 6 inches lower and took out his tool. I was crushed, but things got worse. The PI believed but couldn't prove that Roger was selling cocaine or heroin from his apartment because so many people came and left after a minute. The PI didn't know if Colleen was involved in selling drugs or just using them. Roger's father was a police captain and had a lot of power, but I wrote flattering stories about several police detectives over the years, and we had become friends. They tipped me off to great stories, and occasionally I could give them information to put away some bad guys. It was time to call in some chits. I told both of them the complete story, that a possible drug dealer was being intimate with my wife, and that his dad had juice in the department. One of them was frightened away, but the other one had a long-time grudge against Roger's father, who he said was a dirty cop and was eager to nail his son's hide to the wall in retribution. The next week, Moira had the flu and a very upset stomach. I took off from work to take care of her. I wanted Colleen to not spend the evening in the library, but to help me with Moira. She refused and said she had important research to complete. I completely lost it. I told her I knew that her research was at Roger's apartment, and it was time to stop acting like a slut and start acting like a mother. She didn't deny it, but instead told me that he was the love of her life and 10 times better than I was in bed. He could give her something that I couldn't, she said. You mean cocaine? I screamed as I threw my soda can at the wall. During the 60s, I lost 3 of my closest friends, and now Colleen to drugs. I watched people I cared about destroy themselves and those they loved. When I saw drugs glorified in movies or songs, I wanted to vomit. As angry as I was, and believe me, I actually was seeing red. I got on my knees and begged Colleen to go to a drug rehabilitation clinic, and I would pay for it. It was my last desperate attempt to save her. You don't even have to stay with me. You can leave me, and for your sake and Moira's, I'll still pay for your rehab. Colleen just laughed at me. Even though Colleen broke my heart, I had no thoughts of revenge. What she was doing to herself was worse than any torture I could imagine inflicting on her. Roger, however, was a different story. I vowed to completely destroy him for ruining my marriage and involving Colleen again with drugs, not to mention invading my house to beat or kill me. She packed a bag, grabbed her vomiting daughter, and ran out of the apartment. I didn't hear from her for a month, and neither did her parents. I was worried sick about Moira. During that time, I contacted my detective friend and asked about any progress investigating Roger's possible drug dealings. He told me to be patient, and soon I would have an exclusive story. One day, Colleen phoned me screaming that I hadn't paid her college tuition for the upcoming semester. I told her that was now Roger's responsibility and hung up. She sued me for divorce, alimony, child support, and of course her college tuition. Her parents shocked me when they called to apologize to me for their daughter's behavior. I was so angry with my SDBXW that I didn't miss her, but I sorely missed Moira, especially at bedtime when I used to read her storybooks or when I pushed her on a swing at the playground. A day later, my detective friend warned me not to write about his next arrest because it would create trouble for both of us, but he wouldn't amplify his statement. 2 nights later, he called me from a payphone and told me to watch the evening news. Roger, 2 other men, and Colleen were arrested for selling cocaine and heroin from Roger's apartment. Moira was taken to Child Protective Services until Colleen's parents could pick her up. I couldn't write the story because of the obvious conflict of interest, and also because I was too broken-hearted to sit down at a typewriter. I hadn't known she was involved with dealing and felt no joy in Colleen's arrest. Deep down, I still loved her as much as I hated her. If that doesn't make sense to you, don't worry. It doesn't make sense to me either. If she could magically have reverted to the girl I once loved, I would probably have taken her back, but I knew that was impossible. Her drug addiction was apparently too powerful and had destroyed the girl I used to know. She no longer existed. The heartbreaking reality was that she cared more about drugs than she cared about her daughter, much less me. Of course, our divorce went through unchallenged. I didn't have to pay alimony to someone in prison for 5 years. I didn't owe child support because I was not Moira's legal father. Colleen's parents were wonderful. I saw Moira every weekend, and I helped her grandparents out financially so they could take better care of her. To show me their appreciation on my next visit, my former in-laws and Moira serenaded me by singing Hava Nagila. I responded with my off-key version of Joy to the World. Then we split the pizza I brought, half mushrooms on the Jewish, kosher side, and half non-kosher pepperoni on the Catholic side. One autumn evening, I accompanied Moira and her grandparents for parent-teachers night at Holy Child Elementary School. It was the same school that Marie had attended many years before. Moira's grandmother, My former mother-in-law gave her husband 1 in 10 odds that the Almighty would strike me dead for being Jewish and entering a church, so she wouldn't stand too close to me. I was admiring Moira's artwork on the wall when her teacher, who stood behind me, put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Steve, it's been a long time. I didn't know Moira was your daughter." That voice alone brought tears to my eyes. I turned around and almost fainted. Her teacher was my childhood crush, Marie, and she wasn't wearing the habit of a nun. She was dressed in regular clothing. For one of the very few times in my life, I was speechless. I grabbed her hand, which still rested on my shoulder, and held it. "Are you still a nun?" I mumbled. "I left the convent years ago before I took my final vows. I didn't have the vocation." "That's great," I blurted out. "Why did you want to be a nun anyway?" "I didn't have a choice. My mother threatened to throw me out of my house. She said it was either the convent or the streets. I wanted to kill myself, like Romeo's Juliet, but didn't because I'm Catholic. As you know, I grew up with one dictatorial mother who barked orders at me my whole childhood and couldn't endure living with a dictatorial mother superior giving me orders for the rest of my life." "Why didn't you contact me?" I asked. She looked puzzled. "I sent you several letters, and I told your mother in person. I thought you stopped caring about me." "I never stopped caring about you." I held her hands in mine. We looked at each other, realizing that my mother cheated me and never told me. Later, we went out for coffee and brought one another up to date on our lives. She was a widow with 2 young sons. Her husband was killed in Vietnam. She used her GI widow benefits to pay the college tuition for her BA degree in early childhood education and development. I hadn't previously known for sure how smart she was. I just suspected it. She chose to return and teach at her former elementary school so she could instruct this next generation of children. Tolerance, not hatred of people of other religions. I told her that I was pleasantly shocked at the intensity of the feelings I still had for her. Her response was to give me a long, lingering kiss. "I guess my weakness is Catholic girls," I told her. She told me that her weakness must be Jewish boys, because her late husband was also Jewish. 2 nights later, after 20-some years of foreplay, we finally made love. It was worth the wait. As we lay in each other's arms, I opened my nightstand and handed Marie the crucifix that fell from her neck the day her mother slapped her and tore the chain when we were 13, and the chain from my mezuzah still entangled with it. Marie took the mezuzah from its chain and placed it on her chain next to her crucifix, then placed the chain with both symbols around her neck. After 3 months of dating, I asked her to be my wife. We took our 3 children and Moira's grandparents to City Hall and were married there. We didn't want our parents there. They didn't deserve to be there and would have probably created a scene. The next day, Marie presented me to her parents. Her father didn't have a problem with me, but her mother wanted to kill me. I felt like the fat guest of honor at a cannibal banquet. "You can't find a nice Catholic boy to marry? It always has to be a Jew." She screamed at her daughter and ran upstairs crying. Then we went 3 doors down to my parents' house and repeated the scene, except in reverse. I dragged my mother to Marie's parents' house, and Marie's father dragged her mother downstairs. My mother said that raising children in a mixed religion family would confuse them and make them neurotic. My mother believed that everyone was neurotic except she. Calling someone neurotic was her go-to insult. She actually believed that she was the smartest and most emotionally stable on earth, and everyone else was stupid and neurotic. It always cracked me up that she never realized how crazy this made her look. Marie spoke to her mother. "Do you want to keep seeing your grandchildren?" Her mother thought long and hard before she nodded her head yes. My mother jumped the gun and said that Moira wasn't really her grandchild. I nodded in agreement as I rubbed Marie's stomach and said, "But Lord willing, in about 6 months this child will be." Both of our mothers began crying as they looked at each other. I spoke first. "You two have hated each other for over 25 years because 4,000 years ago one family lived in Israel and another in Germany and Ireland. I have news for you. Neither of you have ever been to either Israel or Germany or Ireland. It's time to get over it and join the 20th century. I can't tell you that they became fast friends, but at least they stopped hating each other out loud. I suppose I should have shunned my mother for not telling me years ago that Marie had left the convent, but she was still my mother. When she wasn't busy being a bigoted hater, she had been a pretty good mother to me and step-grandmother to Moira. Our children were raised celebrating Christmas, Hanukkah, Easter, and Passover. It didn't make them crazy, but seemed perfectly natural to them and to many of their friends who also lived in mixed religion families. We even joined a diverse religion house of worship geared towards mixed marriage families such as ours. The officiants were a gay rabbi and his partner a gay Methodist minister. The leader of the choir was a former nun. I think we had most of the bases covered. Marie and I both knew a woman in the congregation named Kathleen. She and I dated once when we were 15. She was now also married to a Jewish man. One night when the four of us dined together and drank a little too much, Kathleen commented on how much Marie and I had changed for the better since we were teenagers. She said Marie was the prettiest and most stuck-up girl at Little Flower High School, and I tried too hard to be funny on our date and was in fact really obnoxious. She said that the Almighty works in mysterious ways. She thought that if we had dated as teenagers, we wouldn't have lasted a month together. But by the time we did start dating, we had outgrown our teenage ego problems and were ready for each other. Colleen was again arrested for possession of a controlled substance and in and out of rehab at least 3 times that I knew of. She kept her parents and Moira in a constant state of heartbreak. Roger vanished without a trace. The rumor was that he owed a lot of money to some gentleman from Cartagena, Colombia. No one knew if they killed him or he ran away to hide from them. Of course, I was the one who had him arrested out of my need for vengeance on him for ruining my marriage. But after that, he managed to destroy his own life much more effectively than I could have. Since Colleen would always be a stone-cold junkie and her parents were old and unwell, we all agreed that Marie and I should adopt Moira. Colleen's parents were in heaven because their granddaughter's stepmother was Catholic. After I gave Colleen $5,000, she agreed and signed the adoption papers. I was sure the money went right into her veins. I couldn't save Colleen. My only goal was to save Moira. I was afraid that Roger's father would demand custody, but perhaps since he was a widower living the good life, it didn't happen. At first, Colleen would see Moira at Christmas and on her birthday, but over the years those 2 visits morphed into Hallmark cards, and then eventually even that stopped. When Colleen's parents died, I was the executor of their estate. I sold their modest home and put the money in trust for Moira's college education as their wills dictated. Colleen was at her mother's funeral unsuccessfully demanding money from her mother's estate. Moira refused to even speak with her, and it didn't seem to bother Colleen. When I shook Colleen's hand, I saw the needle tracks between her fingers. She looked like an emaciated ghost, and even though I no longer loved her, her condition broke my heart once again. Marie wanted me to give Colleen some money, but I knew it would go straight into her veins. Instead, we took her out to lunch at Horn and Hardart's restaurant where she devoured her meal, and then to Pin Fruit Supermarket where we filled 3 carts with food for Colleen and drove her to the abysmal apartment in which she lived. If she said thank you, I didn't hear it. It was the last time I ever saw her. When we got into the car and we drove away, Moira hugged Marie and me as she told us how much she loved us. Moira asked if she would end up like her mother Colleen because of heredity. This isn't about heredity. I put my arm around her and tried to explain that her mother's downfall wasn't a result of her genes because her parents were wonderful people, but because of Colleen's destructive life choices. I warned my daughter that if she dated bums, she would marry a bum. If she married a bum, she would soon become a bum. Years later, 1 month after she graduated from my alma mater, Temple University, we celebrated Moira's wedding. Her 2 half-sisters were her proud and beaming bridesmaids. Her step-brothers were ushers. Her stepmother was her matron of honor, and because my eyes were so full of happy tears, I could barely see as I experienced one of the proudest moments of my life, walking my daughter Moira down the wedding aisle. Many years after Moira's wedding, 2 days after our 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by our children, grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren, Marie died of cancer as I held her hands in mine. Later that week, before the funeral director closed her coffin, Moira pushed my wheelchair and oxygen tank next to Marie's coffin. I placed in her now cold hands the chain with her cross and my mezuzah that had bound our hearts together during all those years we were kept apart. I hoped the 2 symbols would shine like a beacon above her heart, so if there was a next life I could find her there and be by her side, which according to my cancer specialist wouldn't be long, which was fine with me. I designed and paid for a tombstone that in a month or 2, when I die, will stand above our side-by-side graves. It was a cross in the middle of a Star of David. Inscribed in the center of the 2 religious symbols would be the words she whispered in my ear decades earlier. Amor vincit omnia, love conquers all. Dear listeners, the story has been another work by our beloved Ronald Burns. Quoting Ron in his own words here, in the summer of 1967 when I was 19, I really was a private detective investigating a murder and arson at the Teamsters headquarters. That part of this story is 100% true. The rest of the story was inspired by real people and real events in my neighborhood. I believe I have been respectful to both religions and cultures in this story. Though Marie and I never dated or married, we are still friends, and yes, she really was slapped across the face for speaking with me, and I was forbidden by my parents from speaking to her. By 24, she was a widow with 2 children, but I was already married to my present wife with 1 child. Otherwise, who knows what might have been. Please visit other work by Ron on Amazon. We have the links in the description box, and please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.